Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Joe Corallo again. How are you?
I'm all right, Perch. How are you?
I'm doing good. I ask you that every time. I don't know what I'm assuming you're always doing okay. So
So far, I mean, I'm sure I've been terrible on some days, but
yes,
I'm probably not here for that. So
I'll be terrible right now, just to even
excellent.
talk. That'll be perfect.
That's great.
So we're going to talk about a legend in the industry, a guy who I think a lot of people know, and I think worked for everyone almost. No, I mean just about everybody in the entire comic industry. I'm
Yeah,
talking, of course, yeah, about Rich Buckler.
yeah. Rich Buckler, since like the '70s, he bounced around Marvel and DC. He's probably drawn just about every single character you can imagine.
Yeah,
He did a lot of license work. I mean, when you pull up his body of work,
it's everything.
yeah, I mean, he's drawn, he did a ton of stuff with Fantastic Four and like World's Finest in particular.
Hmm.
He, yeah, I mean, he's drawn he did licensed comics. He did Archie.
Yep, he's been
Uh,
to Image. He's been to Dynamite. He's drawn Red Sonja's butt. He's done
yeah,
everything.
yeah, Malibu comics, what was it? Yeah, I mean everything over the course of that time. Atlas Comics. He was the guy I think who was really responsible for, or one of the guys responsible for that. Like, was it Red Circle at Archie, like the
Yep,
superhero
yeah, that
line?
shared universe. Well, not shared universe. That was before that time. But yeah, the Mighty Crusaders. He was
Yeah.
a star in that. He has this rep that does come up even today of like which one artist has drawn the most characters,
Hmm.
and Buckler's name often usually comes up as the guy who's drawn everyone from DC, everyone from Marvel,
Yeah.
and it sounds like that's potentially accurate. I mean, he's done everything.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the people that's done everything there, and he, according to Rich himself, I've met the guy on multiple occasions. He did pass away in 2017, but
Mhm.
I met him on multiple occasions, multiple cons. I have original artwork from him. I've been to his studio and hung out with him. According to Rich, he was the sole creator of Deathlok.
Okay, excellent.
That's what he felt about that character, and Doug Mank is listed as the co-creator of Deathlok, but according to Rich, it was all him, and Doug just wrote like the script, but that Rich came up with the character design, the idea, and it was more like Doug just wrote the script that was involved with that, which starts getting us to why Rich maybe was disliked by so many people.
Yeah. We're getting there.
Yeah.
So, what you're saying is he was a creator of Deathlock, which means technically he is the co-creator. He's the shoulders people stood on for the great Death Locket.
Yeah, I have the, proud badge of honor of being the person to inform Rich that Death Locket existed.
Yeah.
And I showed it to him,
He must have
and
been very proud.
he, yeah, he thought it was very stupid. He used a word that I'm not going to use here, but you all know what that word is, to describe how he felt about that character.
Yes.
Yeah, he was very upset by it. But Rich's legacy extends beyond drawing comics. He had multiple assistants over the year. In particularly, two of his assistants were Dennis Cowan
Mhm.
and George Perez.
Yeah.
At a time where there were people of various backgrounds in the industry, but it wasn't that common for someone like Rich to introduce two uh, people of color who would go on to have massively successful careers in comics.
Yeah. I mean, arguably two of the most famous artists in all of comics, right there.
Yeah, to this day. I
Yeah.
mean, it's crazy how much they went on to certainly, surpass Rich and, have tremendous careers. And as talented as Dennis Cowan and George Perez are, one could make the argument that it wouldn't have mattered. They eventually would have made it big in comics, because look at how creative and just magnificent their artistic capabilities are. The way comics works and the way life works is it's that, like, 80% is showing up. It's being at the right place at the right time. If you didn't have Rich there getting George Perez in at Marvel when he did, he probably wouldn't have gotten on Avengers at the time. I mean, George was only like 2 years out of high school when he was becoming a regular artist at Marvel.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen without someone like Rich Buckler there pushing you and making sure you get out there, because as much as we like to act like all these people got there purely on talent, there are incredible artists that we'll never know because they weren't at the right place at the right time.
The network matters. It absolutely matters. And we've seen that in comics time and time again, of people who got in because of who they know. And sometimes we often talk about that as a bad thing.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're talking about, a young George Perez. His career was really ignited in good part because of Rich Buckler.
His first published work was in Deathlok.
Yeah.
And
it's weird to say that out loud, but it's true.
Yeah. And if George Perez didn't do what he did at the right time, he doesn't leave Marvel with Marv Wolfman to do New Teen Titans. Mm-hmm. New Teen Titans doesn't become the big success it is, that leads to him doing Crisis and ultimately becoming one of the single most popular 80s artists there, up there with John Byrne. Yeah. It doesn't happen. Dennis Cowan doesn't go on to have necessarily the same career at the same time. I mean, Dennis Cowan was only like 14, I think, when he started as an assistant for Rich.
That is correct. That's what I see here as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, so that's pretty incredible that these two individuals came in this way, and then they're coming in via Rich Buckler, who at that point, I mean, well, now to get into the kind of the controversy you alluded to, Buckler is somebody who, I don't want to, maybe hated is too strong a word, but fairly universally disliked. And as I was getting ready to talk to you, I was looking around, I came across a kind of a longish rant by John Byrne, who, he hates the guy. And pretty easy to see a lot. You can very quickly find a lot of creators really slamming Buckler. And why is that?
Yeah, I mean, one reason you see is there's a pretty lengthy article from, I think it's CBR, talking about an instance with David McElhenney, who was at the time doing Star Hunters, and Rich became the regular artist on that. And David went on to have him be the regular artist, had him give him some examples of ship designs. And one of the star ship designs, David later found out was basically a swipe from a kid's cartoon. And that really upset David, and he ended up going over to Marvel as a result. It turned out it wouldn't have mattered probably either way, because the DC implosion happened shortly after that, and the book would have been canceled, and David would have been out of luck. But it's probably good David did it when he did, because he was able to get in at Marvel before the implosion happened.
Yeah.
That said, it is interesting because Star Hunters, the way David talks about this here, and I adore David. I've met David. He is a phenomenal creator.
You're about to say the same thing I'm thinking, I suspect.
Yeah, no one cares about Star Hunters. It's not a precious property that is worth holding in such high regard, because the way David approaches it is, it's like this swipe of this one ship design from a cartoon completely undermines my brilliant idea that is, Star Hunters, a comic no one cares about. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
So it does seem certain at the time. I totally get it. You're in it. You're doing this comic. In hindsight, looking back now, especially when you look at the incredible body of work that David Michelinie has under his belt, it's like, who cares that you did Star Hunters?
And this isn't a defense of swiping or tracing,
no.
But the art piece in question is really, who cares? I mean, it's I'm looking at it and it's like, okay, it's the same shape and he's put some of the same things on here, but it's like, I don't know, this was a panel. Like, I mean, I don't know. I just, it's hard to imagine throwing down and saying this is destroying all the creative integrity of the company and I'm going to quit if you don't fire this guy, which DC, as the story goes, I think DC didn't fire him.
No.
And so then he walked.
Yeah.
And then kind of the story got out that the title was canceled because of the swiping, but the title was canceled amidst everything in the DC implosion. And it's hard to believe that swiping had any bearing on it one way or another.
No, absolutely not. And you're right. It is silly with how that went down, and other arguments that people would have over swiping. I think one interesting point too is in the article, it's sort of, David was very upset about this and talks about how it's so lazy and this and that, but I don't think you can talk to a single artist today who would think it's lazy sticking to a monthly schedule, and you do have to cut corners. Talk to the people at Image in the early 90s. I don't think any of them thought they were lazy, but they couldn't get a book out on a monthly schedule. It's hard work. It's
very hard. And I think, and again, none of this, I know some people may have this view in the comments, and this is not a defense of swiping.
Absolutely not. No.
But, I mean, the list of artists that swipe is massive.
It's massive, and it doesn't stick to them like it sticks to Buckler.
Yes.
It stuck so hard to Buckler. But when you look up, like if you Google and look at, people who have been accused of swiping, it's everyone from Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Bob Kane, Gil Kane, Liefeld, David Mack, Todd McFarlane, Keith Giffen, Ron Friends, like Mike Allred. The Greg Land is a current example of someone who is constantly reminded by people that he's either swiping or he's tracing.
Yeah.
He just traced that like Alien cover.
Yeah. There's a solicitation out for his symbiote Spider-Man, where the comic reviewer is putting in the credits Greg Land and then a bunch of actresses from Pornhub as the creators of the comic. I mean, it's a joke at this point, yet Land continues to get work and covers, and it doesn't seem to matter.
And it doesn't turn into this hatred that it did with Rich.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, we were talking before, but I'm trying to figure out what else did he do. There had to have been more here, because the tracing alone, Comics Journal, of course, in 1983, publishes this article, I think, calling him a plagiarist and saying he was writing his name over Kirby's work. And I think they showed some examples that clearly were Kirby drawings, and clearly, I mean, there's no mistake about it. Rich was copying that style. I mean, there's no illusions there. And then Buckler sues them, but then drops the suit, and then weirdly everybody starts taking a victory lap, like we beat him. And it's just it all feels very strange, like maybe Buckler had kicked their children or something.
Yeah, there are a few odd stories out there, and I have heard them from people who were involved. So these are secondhand. One of them's a third-hand story, but there, I'm not going to name names, but there are stories going around about how, and these are crazy, but there's one that he was involved in selling Russian brides.
Okay, sure.
That was a story that was going around, that he would solicit people if they were interested in buying Russian brides.
You got to supplement that comic income somehow.
Yes. There's another story where a book he was fired from for being late, that he would go on to either hire or convince a couple of guys to rough up the artists that took over the book.
Nice.
So yeah, this is where I think we start to see where these things are happening, where there is this disconnect that, like, no one's talking about, and there are people who are just like, I don't like this guy, but they're not coming out and saying exactly why.
Yeah, and so it does always feel like you said, there's this stigma of swiping that sticks with him, but the vitriol behind it, the anger behind it, seems out of proportion to others, and you figure there has to be something under the covers there, and you just don't exactly know what. I mean, he did also, you will know the story better than I. He used an alias for a while to try and skirt his exclusive contract to be able to work with both big companies at the same time. Have you heard about that one?
Yeah, there was that, but it might have been less common when he was doing it, but that was still something that kind of was going on.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I think Rich ended up being the victim of being one of those last people who was doing a few things, because I do think that what he was doing in terms of swiping was a much more common practice in the years before he was more prevalent.
Yeah.
House styles were in. That was what you did. You would get marching orders of, like, we're hiring you on this Fantastic Four book because you can kind of do a Jack Kirby.
Right. And they would hire you and they would tell you, do a Jack Kirby. I mean,
yeah. That's how it was. And I think what ended up happening was he stuck to some of that past the time people were moving on from that. But it was prevalent, both in swiping and in using aliases. But because he stuck to it longer, it stuck to him in a way it didn't his predecessors.
Yeah, it is curious. Because even I remember when Marvel announced his death on their Twitter account, a lot of the comments were pretty nasty. And the anger over it seemed way out of proportion for a guy who was doing things that were very common in the industry. But
his I remember that was very odd when he passed away, that they didn't. It was very weird how they handled it. His relationship with a lot of people was very strained. Paul Levitz wrote a nice sort of obituary or acknowledgement of his passing on his Facebook, but even then made it a point to refer to Rich as having a complicated legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
He pointed out Dennis Cowan in particular, and how he helped, bring up these, artists along with them. But it's one of those things where it seemed like you can't mention the guy's name without, also attacking him, or else people will get the wrong impression or something. Like, you can't just be like, oh, this Rich Buckler did this, without then following it up with, I know he's a swipe artist and he's a terrible person. It's very weird how that got cultivated in a way. And again, we are not defending swiping.
No, of course not.
We're simply pointing out a weird guy who's difficult to work with, who's stubborn, and has done some very odd things is far from unusual in this industry.
That's right. He was swiping the personality.
Yeah.
I mean, even I was looking up just different comments, and there's this comment from Byrne that said one of his motivations for doing the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, that the covers that formed this giant picture where he basically drew all the characters. One of his motivations was doing that was to say he's drawn more Marvel characters than Rich Buckler, which feels like a very odd motivation to do something. I mean,
yeah,
that's weird.
It's very weird, and he would later go on to being really pushed far aside in the industry, and I mean, a lot of his work by the '90s completely dried up, and that's not just the case for Rich.
He swiped that too.
Yeah, it's I mean, Glenn Greenberg, in our interview with him, check it out if you haven't yet, talked about how they kind of got rid of a lot of the older artists and the styles they considered to be outdated in the '90s to go for more of an image style.
Yeah.
But then when things changed, he was one of the people that was never really brought back. When they did a Deathlok series shortly before he passed, it was maybe 2015 or 2016, so somewhere around then, he got to do a variant cover for issue 4. Like, they didn't, like, it was an afterthought well after the series happened that they were like, oh geez, want to give Rich a variant cover for one of these Deathlok comics?
Yeah.
And he was a pretty abrasive guy in a way. I'd see him at cons. He'd charge $3 for an autograph.
Yeah, always a move that endears you to fans.
Yeah, it was, and just $3 too. It was just such a like, all right, $3. Okay,
that's kind of an odd number. Yeah,
yeah, very, very odd. And it wasn't like 2 for $5. It was just like $3.
He filled up a pile of singles for some purpose. Anyway, it is strange. And what's funny about all this stuff too is he's got some books out that he's done. In particular, How to Draw Superheroes, How to Become a Comic Artist, are books that you can actually, unlike other books, are actually in print, and you can get them on Amazon today. Very, very, very weird. I don't know. To me, what was his big thing? I think he was on the Death of Jean DeWolf toward the end of his Marvel run.
He was on that.
He did one of the first Black Panther comics.
Yeah, he worked with Don McGregor in what's considered one of the major runs on that character. But he probably did the most on Fantastic Four. He was on that for a while. And not always consecutively, but the closest thing he really had to like a run was probably World's Finest at DC and Fantastic Four at Marvel, because he didn't do like the full 30 issues from like 142 to 171, but he did almost all of them.
Yeah, I mean, he did a lot of damage there. I don't mean it that way.
Yes.
He there was a lot of comics there. Did a pretty lengthy amount of Justice League of America comics there. He's got quite a, well, like we said at the beginning, he's drawn everything, and his characters, I think it was fairly distinctive. Again, the comments are that he's got a great style that is really other people's style. Yeah. But I don't know. It's weird to see somebody who contributed quite a lot, did a lot of monthly books. As far as I was searching for it, there's no comments of him being late or missing deadlines. He was very reliable. But he, along with there's a couple others that just seem to have this stigma that they will never erase.
Yeah, I do think he was late on All-Star Squadron, which is why I was off the book at issue 5. And there were some other issues in terms of, I don't know all the stories, but assistants and things like that helping him meet deadlines.
Yeah.
But he did do a lot. He certainly finished more comics than most people, because you look at that, you look him up. It's, again, it's kind of sad in the sense that he never really got a run. He was always like, he was the guy. It's like, we need someone to get in there and keep things going. Let's get rich. And, but he was very opinionated. I remember once commenting, because he was also a painter, and he was a big fan of Dolly. And I had commented about the work looking psychedelic, and he was very upset. He was like, I am not I am a surrealist, and was very adamant about the differentiation. And he talking about like psychedelia, that's referring to drugs, and that's, I don't do nothing like that. Surrealism. It's very, very interesting. And he also, when I went to his studio, he showed me pages from a book he was trying to get off the ground with a writer. I forget the writer's name, but he showed me pages and character designs of a book that never happened. And it was because people wouldn't return calls. No one wanted to work with Rich. To an extent, some of that's earned. To another extent, it's hard not to feel sad that this guy genuinely wanted to make comics, and just having conversations with him and seeing him around, I feel like he didn't quite understand why he couldn't get work in the industry anymore. That he was genuinely bitter and frustrated over that. And some of that is earned, if some of those stories, based on some of those stories, but some of it isn't.
Well, it's not like he was like Vince Coletta trying to throw somebody out a window.
Yeah. And
so there's that.
Had some pretty steady work there, like it's not quite as tragic as like a Kurt Swan, who really put in his dues, did everything he could for Superman, and then Crisis came along and was persona non grata at DC, and fell into alcoholism, and that's truly tragic, and we should talk about Kurt Swan sometime too. Yes. But Rich is such an interesting, complicated person, and his passing at the big two went by with such little fanfare.
Well, yeah, I mean, for a guy, it's hard not to feel bad about it, because it's a guy who gave the companies a lot. And again, tracing or no, swiping or no, tons of artists are doing it today unashamedly, and they're getting work just fine. Like you said, I do think there's an interesting story there about how style pushed artists to mimic other artists. I mean, it was very common at Marvel to hear, we need you to do this in a Ditko style, we need you to do this in a Kirby style, as the instruction given to the artist. And so if you're an artist, like, what do you do with that? Yeah, I mean, you're gonna wind up very closely copying and mirroring their stuff. And in some of Rich's case, it was, complete one-to-one. I mean, you could see there's Fantastic Four images people have laid, next to each other, and it's exactly what Kirby had done. So that's, again, not good, not trying to defend that behavior, but you do feel bad for a guy who was kind of, pretty much told to do that, and then suddenly it was not okay. And meanwhile, he's watched other people put that together. It's and also meanwhile helped introduce two of the most celebrated and beloved artists of all time.
Yeah, and in his memorial through Marvel, which I think we'll probably show at some point in the video that image. In memory of an unparalleled talent, and it's picture Rich Buckler, his one original creation at Marvel, Deathlok, is not in it.
Yeah.
It's Thing, and then like Black Bolt and Medusa are the characters in the background. And the one character he was so proud of creating, he has a Deathlok statue in his studio, loves talking about Deathlok.
Yeah.
His memorial, the one character, he only created one major character at Marvel. And in his memorial, they couldn't even just have that character in the background.
Yeah.
It's like when Herb Trimpe passed away and they didn't have Wolverine in his memorial.
Sure. Well,
like, again, it's just incredibly bizarre, and it's either petty or tone deaf, and either are bad.
Well, yeah. I mean, I play this game a lot with various people, celebrities, others. The gentleman who does the movie reviews with me, Ryan, and I do this a lot. It's evil or stupid, and which neither is a good answer, by the way. But it's hard to tell.
The fact that they had Rich come back to do a Deathlok variant cover shortly before he died does show they were aware he was involved in Deathlok, and they still it looked like they had an intern throw together a memorial post really quick that they published in those comics after he passed away.
Which probably they did. So, yeah. I mean,
I mean, it's insane.
I've had this conversation with a few creators who kind of nosed around and edged into this question. I'm curious to get your take on it. And it's not meant to be a leading question. Is this industry, why does it seem to do so poorly by its legacy or by its elders, by the people who've had it? Why is it that most people do not get the happy ending in comics? They tend to leave it, and it's. Do you have a view on that?
I think partly because, especially for artists, it's a physically demanding job, and oftentimes artists can't have the workload they want towards the end, and it's easy to forget. Style is another thing. It's easier to see people and writers go in and out of style. People don't like giving people who've been around a chance to come back and work on things because, that's dated. No one likes it, despite the fact that we've talked about this recently. Yep. Man of Steel Volume 1 hardcover collection, a $50 book on Amazon. I think it's discounted. It's probably $30 on Amazon. Is outselling almost everything DC's putting out today on Amazon.
Yeah. I don't get it. I think there's lots of evidence to the case, but you hear that about people like George Perez, certainly John Byrne. I've recently started to see it cropping up with people like Mark Silvestri, that his style is dated, and it's like, it's weird. It makes you feel old. It makes you feel angry in a lot of cases. You get a guy who, for one thing or another, and whatever bad stories are there in the background that we don't know that led to some of this. You just would hope that the industry would do better by these people in the end.
Yeah, it's a real shame that someone like Rich, who genuinely loved making comics and isn't the worst person by far who's been involved in the industry, has had to spend his last decades really being an outcast in the industry he loved, when people he knew were still in positions to hire and just didn't call him, and he was bitter and sad and passed away. I think a lot of people need to remember, keep in mind, that's the end of everyone's story. and then they died. And you gotta keep these things in mind, because that really is the end of everyone's story. No matter how great you are, that's the end of the story. And I think we would all do better to keep these things in mind and try to support the people who made this industry possible in some respect.
Well, that's the best thing that's going to be said on YouTube today, so we should leave it there.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.